This is Andrew Paul Cronin, and you're listening to the Q&A with A.P.C., the show that features conversations with artists, cultural figures, policymakers, performers, and other innovators living in Virginia. Episode 9, Edd Davin. Professional race car driver Edd Davin may not be a household name, but he is well known and respected in the professional racing community. For 55 years, Edd has done what few people can claim. He makes his living driving and racing automobiles. In this episode, Edd describes how his racing career got started, what it's like to drive a car 200 miles per hour, how to do a burnout in your own car, and much, much more. For more information about Edd Davin and his race team, visit davinracing.com. This episode of the Q&A with A.P.C. was recorded at Edd's house in Virginia Beach, Virginia. What time do you normally get up in the morning?
Usually between 3 o'clock and 3:30 a.m.
Why do you get up so early?
It's quiet. I have time to get my thoughts together for the day.
Yeah?
I can come up and sit at my desk and listen to the news and make notes of who I want to contact, what projects I may want to work on for the day. And it's just a very peaceful time for me. The world hasn't started moving yet.
Right. You were born in Atlantic City, New Jersey. That's right?
Yeah.
You were raised by your grandparents?
Yeah.
And your aunt as well?
Aunt Shirley, yeah.
Can I ask what happened to your parents?
Just a couple of weeks before I turned 6, my father committed suicide in front of me. Yeah, and then I lost contact with my mother at the same time. She was off living her own life. So, I spent most of my time with my grandmother and my Aunt Shirley, and it was pretty good. Yeah, sounds like a bad life, but it was pretty darn good.
What did your grandparents do for jobs?
They ran a grocery business, and my Aunt Shirley worked in tailoring and clothing type things. My uncle was a tailor. His business was tailoring, and she assisted him in that business. During World War II, she played in women's professional baseball.
Yeah, I heard that she played professional baseball. That's sort of like that Tom Hanks movie.
Yeah, League of Their Own.
League of Their Own.
Yeah.
Do you think that her playing in that league during World War II gave you the confidence to think that you could actually make a living in sports?
Nobody ever influenced me growing up to say, enter into a professional sporting career. The family probably had designs on me being a doctor or perhaps a lawyer. Types of people I grew up with, that's kind of what you did. I had a pretty good feel for mechanical things, and I would get with my aunt occasionally and help her work on her car, even as a little tiny child. Probably the experience doing that, and then the other people in our community, I hung around. Hot rod cars and stuff like that were big in the 50s and early 60s when I was growing up. But I just fell into it. It was something I liked, and I was, right from the get-go, I was, successful with it. So that early success as a kid just led me, I'll drive this car, then I'll drive that car, then I'll try this. It was probably accidental. I didn't intend to be a professional race car driver, although I admired race car drivers.
Across the street from where you grew up was a guy who rode a motorcycle back to and from work.
Well, he was he's actually the reason I got driving race cars. I would spend a lot of time in his shop. He built race cars, and he was injured, and I had been helping him, and he had actually let me drive the cars in the alley behind his shop, so he could look at them from time to time, see what they looked like to him. After he was injured, he said, "You want to try driving that car?"
How did he get injured?
He was on the way home. He was in the Army, and I'm not sure if it was the reserve or full-time Army at the time. He was coming home on a highway from Fort Dix, New Jersey, back to Atlantic City, which isn't a very long distance. Probably going a little too fast on roads that probably were a little wet. And he crashed the motorcycle, and he basically put one leg on each side of a tree that he hit. He was real bad off, but he could get around in a wheelchair or some crutches.
What was your first race?
It was at Pleasantville, New Jersey. It was a quarter-mile oval, quarter midget.
How'd you do? What'd you place?
First.
You got first place in your first race?
Yeah.
Were you younger than most of the drivers?
Yeah, I was 12, and I claimed I was 14 at the time, but I was 12, and most all the other drivers were in their 20s, 30s, 40s.
Did you have to claim 14 because there was an age restriction, or you just felt like 14 sounded better than 12?
You had to be 14. You had to be old enough to have a state driver's license, which was 14 in New Jersey at the time.
And what kind of, that was just an oval track?
Yeah, just a little oval track.
Paved or dirt?
That was on a paved track. $125 for my first race.
And then you went to the SCCA, the Sports Car Club of America driving school.
Yeah. I happened to see a road race at Lime Rock, Connecticut, and I just thought, man, that is cool as heck. Yeah, drag racing, you're in the car for just a matter of seconds.
Mm-hmm.
The little,
Like a quarter mile.
yeah, and the sprint car at the time, the little small ovals were tight and small, and the lap didn't go by just a few seconds on the lap, and a whole race may only be, 5, 10, or 15 laps. The sports car races were a couple of hours, and you were in the car and you could drive a long time, and that just fascinated me. And from that point on, I really didn't want to do anything but road racing.
And a sports car track, there's more turns, there's straightaways. It's more than just an oval. It's a very intricate sort of with S turns. And I mean, can you describe a little bit like what?
You have straightaways, and then you have left turns and right turns, or you could have 2 or 3 right turns or left turns in a row. And instead of just being an oval shape, it's just a lot of squiggly lines that, connected by a few straightaways. To me, I like the art and the science of driving the car, trying to figure out what's the best line through each corner. If you're always going around a left turn, to me at the time, it was, once I figured the line out, all I have to do is keep doing that line, and I'm okay. On a road course, you may have to learn 13 different corners, not all of them left, some of them right. Some of the straightaways are long, some of the straightaways are short. And the challenge of trying to get a perfect line around a track that may include, 10, 12, 13, 15 corners, it was a great challenge, and I really liked that.
In IndyCar and NASCAR, the majority of the races, 95% of the races are oval races, and they have a handful of, I guess, infield sports car tracks. There's Watkins Glen, Sonoma. That may be it.
That's about it on their calendar.
And it seems like the oval track guys sometimes struggle in the infield sports car tracks, to the extent where a lot of teams hire European drivers to sit in the car and do it. Was it a learning curve to drive a sports car track?
Yeah, it was a big learning curve, but that was the fun of it, was learning how to do it. And you'll find a lot of road racers, most road racers, cannot make the transition from driving road races and start driving ovals. The techniques are so much different that a lot of road racers can't pick that up. Just like the stock car driver on the oval tracks has a difficult time learning how to do road courses. They're still race car drivers in their own right, but the techniques used are so much different. And if you spent your lifetime in one, it's hard to transition to the other.
Is there any truth to NASCAR was sort of born out of the illegal moonshine running business? Or is that just a kind of a fun Americana origin story that is...
Well, there's a lot of truth in it, and there's also a lot of folklore. But yeah, Bill France, when he founded NASCAR, and back in its beginning, he looked at those guys that were running moonshine. They're out there building fantastic cars that could outrun the local, revenue agent. They were great drivers. They learned how to drive the cars fast. And he said, he wanted to be involved in racing and design a series. And he was lured, he lured these kind of people to give up that illegal activity, come over and I'll pay you money to race on Sunday instead of carrying some alcohol around in your trunk.
I'm going to run through some stats on your racing career. 57 career wins. You finished 95% of the races that you've entered. 100% qualifying record, meaning you've never failed to qualify for a race. You won the 1984 Formula Continental Championship.
Mm-hmm.
Got second place in 1985. So is the Formula Continental Championship, is that sort of an American Formula One series?
It's a little bit. lower tier.
Yeah.
But yeah, the cars are of similar design and nature. But there's a little correction I'd throw in there. That's
All right.
50. That's
Let's
50.
hear it.
That's 57 wins that are recognized internationally. I have 510 wins out of thousands of races. But a lot of those wins are, little local track races, things that aren't counted in the road racing international record type things. Of all my races, they credit me with 512 wins, but I can only account for 510. So I don't know where they came up with the extra two.
Huh.
But the 57 are internationally recognized, not just like a local track type thing.
Did you have a primary engine or manufacturer that you ran throughout your career, like more than any others? I know that you ran some BMW for a while, in '97 in particular for the World Sports Car, the Daytona Enduro race.
Yeah, I'm primarily identified with General Motors and Chevrolet brand engines. Although General Motors from time to time in road racing wanted you to badge the engine as a Chevrolet, sometimes they'd also want you to badge it as a Buick or a Pontiac. So most people identify me as being mostly a corporate GM engine driver, but I've used Ford engines. I was lured into doing a deal with BMW for a while.
And a 24-hour race, is that a 24-hour race?
Has a 24 hours where the car only stops long enough to be fueled and have tires changed. And if at certain periods we would change drivers throughout those races.
So how many sessions or legs would you drive in a 24-hour race?
Well, they restrict you on how many hours you can actually be behind the wheel consecutively and in the whole race. So, I would sometimes drive usually two stints, 2 fuel stops, get out, be out for 1 or 2 fuel stops, get back in and keep going. You may be in the car for 2, 3, 4 hours, possibly be out for 2 or 3 hours, get back in, so back and forth between 2 drivers or 3 drivers, some cars.
How do you go to the bathroom in a race like that?
I've had a couple people ask me that, and quite frankly, I can never remember ever saying to myself, "Gee, I need to go to the bathroom" while I was in a race car. That just never came up in my mind. And I don't recall getting out of a race car and saying, "Gee, I have to run to the bathroom right away." I don't know if it's an adrenaline thing or you sweat so much you don't have any fluid in your body. But I've never experienced that.
Are there race cars or the driving suits, the fire suits, that have some sort of a contraption for that?
Not that I've ever seen.
I guess people just go? Or maybe they just sweat it out.
I've actually had a couple guys tell me that they had, gosh, I had to take a leak so bad I went ahead and wet my pants. But
right.
I've never experienced it, and I don't think it's something that really comes up more than a very rare opportunity.
Let's hope. What does it take to build a fast race car?
First, acquiring all the correct parts, whether they be body parts, suspension parts, whatever, and putting them together, and then testing and practicing and developing the car, getting the right suspension set up, getting the right aerodynamics, getting wing angles correct on the front wings, rear wings, little side end plates. Everything has to be adjusted until you can get the car to operate at its peak efficiency going through the wind and overcoming the gravity when you're going around a corner, so you can use the weight of the car and gravity and the air to hold you to the track, along with brakes and things. It's massaging all of those pieces together, the thousands of pieces that make up a modern race car.
All the racing series have their own very precise for height of the car, for the weight of the car. Is that right?
Yes.
And so you're allowed to tweak only within the confines of the rule book. Have you ever gotten caught doing something that maybe not on purpose, Ed, but...
Well, there's a philosophy in racing.
Yeah, let's hear it.
That, the rules are black and white. But if you want to win a race, you have to be in the gray between black and white. You have to push. You're always pushing the envelope. Can I get my body work a little closer to the template they want me to use? Can I get a little further away from it and actually pick up speed? So you're always pushing the gray area. And you may push the gray area in 10 areas on the car, and they may catch 9 of them. So you may get one away that maybe you have a little advantage in this one area. So you always want to You don't go out and intentionally say, gosh, well, some people say they want to cheat, but you don't go out and say, I want to cheat. But you want to get as close to the edge of the rule as you possibly can to get every advantage you can get.
Have you ever experienced somebody sabotaging a car or, I don't know, loosening a bolt or something like that? Or
I've never personally experienced that. I've heard it said, back, especially when I was real young, there was friction in the pits. Somebody would come over and say, "Oh, you parked your car on top of my air hose and messed up this or that." I don't really see anybody tampering with cars.
only in the movies?
Yeah, it's sort of a Hollywood thing.
How do you balance going fast or getting to the front of the pack and not wrecking this expensive machine that so many people have labored over, spent money on? I mean, how do you balance getting to the front with bringing it in one piece?
Well, the idea is to win, and you have to be sympathetic to the equipment, but you have to push the piece of equipment and your ability up against the limits to get a win. And I pride myself on having a real good finishing record in races, but you still have to push the car to just about the breaking point. And if you're not willing to do that, if you say, it cost me this much money to build this car, and if I crash it, I've lost that money, you have to forget that. You have to go ahead and winning is the most important thing at that moment.
Have you ever found yourself thinking, oh shit, I've got this $1 million plus machine I'm sitting on, and losing focus on that? Or is that something that you're able or all drivers are able to really just kind of put aside and just focus on speed and passing?
Now, I've had a very close relationship with a lot of good people over the years, and there was a theme that ran through every one of them who worked for me as mechanics or chief mechanics or crew chiefs. They said, we didn't bust our rear ends and put all this work into this car to see you drive around slow to save the car. We came here to win. We didn't come here to come home second. So if you don't go out there and push this car, we don't care. If you're trying to win a race, we don't care if you break it. But if you're just riding around to save the car and you don't win and it breaks, we're not going to be happy.
My guess is it's probably almost safer to try to go fast than be conservative, because I think probably when you're conservative, perhaps that's when you're not really focused. You're not being natural.
Exactly. When you're driving slow and I say slow, you're like 9/10, your focus isn't on where the right turn-in point is, where the right shift point is, where the right brake point is. You're worried about the car. Well, you lose that focus, you actually become more dangerous. And you may miss your brake point. You may go too deep or not deep enough into the corner, hit the brakes, and you may get up in the marbles and break the car because you weren't focused. And if you're pushing the whole time, you're more likely to pay attention to every little stone on the track, every other little blur of color you see in your mirrors, and you'll usually do better if you don't try and baby things.
Describe what it's like to drive a car in the excess of 200 miles per hour.
It's exhilarating, obviously, because speed is great. But when you're out there with 30 or 40 other cars and you're all going at the same speed and trying to go through the corners together, it's very much like driving at 55, 65, 70 miles an hour on the interstate. We're all going in the same direction. We're all doing the same thing. We're obviously trying to do better than each other. But the sensation of speed slows down. You just, like you're out there on the track. It's not slow motion, but it's not the same as speed either. Everything is, you're making split-second decisions, and you're not excited. You're not euphoric about it. It's your job at hand, and you don't kind of lose track of the speed. Even if you look at the guardrails as you pass by them, they may be whizzing by, but you don't really register how fast they're going past you.
Mm-hmm. My next question was, how do you stay relaxed? But I guess the answer to that was just mentioned, because if everyone is kind of running at the same speed, then you're just we're all sort of doing the same thing.
I had a guy tell me when I was coming along, a very famous race car driver named Graham Hill, a much older gentleman, and he said, and he was world Formula One champion. He said the idea is to win the race at the slowest possible speed. And you only go as fast, in his day. You went fast enough to beat everybody else, but you didn't worry about whether you were going 100 miles an hour or 200 miles an hour. The idea was to win the race. And speed's not important. And that's kind of the opinion I have now on the racetrack. I don't care if I'm going 100 miles an hour or 200 miles an hour, as long as I'm in front of the guy behind me and catching the guy in front of me. I don't care how fast it is.
If everyone is relaxed and everyone is going the same speed roughly and everyone has done the testing, what makes one driver win and the other 30, 40 lose?
Being willing as a driver to do everything it takes to win. But you have to have a crew behind you that will also give 100% of their time, effort, and skill to rub and massage and perfect the car you're driving. In all major forms of racing, top-tier driving, there's very little difference between the skill and ability of the drivers. There's obviously some drivers that don't belong on the track, and there's others that have just some natural ability. But there's very little of the top-tier drivers difference in their driving ability. But it's all the people and resources behind them. The people that bolt every one of the little parts together, the people that go out and test those parts, the hours and millions of dollars spent developing that car that they've given to the driver and say, okay, here, we're presenting you with this very, finely tuned piece of equipment. Go out there and win. Well, the driver can't do it without all those people behind him that have developed that car into a winning car. The skill level of the drivers is really quite close together.
They say in NASCAR, at least, that a lot of races are won in the pits.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Changing tires, gassing up the car, pulling a tear off, or wiping the windshield clean. Is that true in all racing or just NASCAR?
All racing. I'm sure you've heard the term, there is no I in team. It takes every member from the driver down to the guy that's putting the gas in it, the guy that's putting the tire on it, the guy that's in the timing stand giving you instructions. It takes a perfect performance by all of these 10, 12, 15 people that are servicing that car on the pit stop to say, every one of them 100% did their job right in the fastest possible time. If any one of them makes a mistake, if the driver comes in and slides the tires and passes by the fellow with the lug wrench trying to change the tire, or the driver stops short and the gas man can't plug the gas line in, if anybody makes a mistake in the pits, you're going to lose. If you're going 200 miles an hour and you're going the length of a football field every half second, well, if you come into the pits and the pit stop should take 15 seconds, but it takes 17 seconds, you've lost a lot of football field distance.
That's a lot. Yeah, that's a good way to picture it. What's the secret to taking a turn on the street?
Doing it safely. But on a racetrack, you're not worried about cars coming the other direction. You're not worried about the police. So you don't have to worry about the laws of driving. On a racetrack, you're trying to perfect the perfect line. How much steering input you give to the wheel causes you to scrub off front tire speed. When you get on the brakes, if you get on too hard or too soft, it'll affect the balance of the car. Racing is a matter of balancing the weight of the car against the adhesion and gravity you can get naturally in life. And it's the person who can balance the weight of the car, the aerodynamics and how the wind affects the car, and get around the corner without sliding off the edge because you're too fast or not having enough speed to get around the corner.
Do you think about that when you're driving around town?
Sometimes when I'm driving around town, and I think this drives my wife nuts once in a while, I will, if I'm by myself on the highway, I'll drive the perfect line down the highway, which may not be between the white and yellow lines.
Yes, I know what you mean.
I'll cross over the yellow line here, or I'll cross over the white line here, and I won't do that if I'm in traffic or something like that. But if I'm just driving down a road, and I may stay in one lane. May be in my lane, but I'll be from the right side of my lane to the left side and back and forth. And Joanne will look at me and say, this is not a racetrack.
Right. Does being a race car driver make you a better driver?
Uh, I believe that race car drivers have enormous skill in the handling of an automobile. But race car drivers are like anybody else. When you're out on the highway, you can still make a dumb mistake, whether it's speeding or running off the side of a road because you did something stupid or got distracted by playing with your phone. Or, a race car driver is a human being. So we're all subject to doing the same things that, John Doe on the highway would do. And if we happen to get a call from the wife who says pick up milk and we're too busy screwing around with
Sure.
the cell phone, you can make that mistake in a well-maintained car.
We know that you've brought your cars in 95% of the time, but there's been 5% times where you haven't. Sometimes that's a blown engine or a blown tire. What's it like to hit the wall, though?
It hurts. It hurts physically. It really does hurt physically. And matter of fact, even if you don't wreck a race car, when you get out at the end of the race, you're hurt physically. But when you wreck, even if you don't break any bones, you've got so many bruises that you hurt. Physically it is okay. I'll heal most of the time, but it's emotionally it's a letdown because you've let down all the people, from the sponsors who put up the money for you to get in the car to every person that worked on that car. You just broke their dream of winning that race or that championship or placing well that day. You've hurt those people because you didn't do your job. The physical injuries, they hurt, but mentally you say, God, I let my people down. A race car driver can't do that by himself. He can't pull into the pits, jump out, change his tires, go off and fill the car, and then get back in and drive. It takes all these people, and when you've wrecked, you just let everybody down, and it's a very bad feeling.
What's your scariest experience ever in a car?
I don't know if I've ever been scared in a car. You have some trepidation in the car. I'm always nervous before a race. I have a tendency to wiggle my legs and stand on my toes before I ever get in the car. Once I'm in the car and the pace lap starts, I become relaxed. But I don't think, if you ever get scared in a race car, you don't belong in a race car. There used to be a term, I heard it mentioned when I was years ago when I first started racing, called seat gap. When a driver's relaxed and calm in his car, he's sitting back with his back against the backrest of the seat. You're just sitting there normally. But when you start to lean forward and look a little harder at what's in front of you, you're getting seat gap. Your back's not on the back of the seat. That means the driver's nervous. And if you're nervous in a race car, you're better off doing something else.
Is there a difference between a European race car driver and an American race car driver?
It's funny, but there really is, and it's not in the ability of the driver, it's in the experience they have. A lot of the European drivers get more experience with more races than we get in the United States. Plus, they get more weather conditions. You see, especially in Great Britain, in England, Scotland, and Ireland, up in those areas, they have a lot of rain. So a lot of those drivers from that region have a lot more experience on rain. They may not be a better rain driver than an American, but they have more experience at it. They have felt what the car does under all kinds of rain conditions, where we may have more sunny days here, so we don't get quite as much rain experience, plus we may not get the same kind of rain. And you find that, there's a big difference between Southern European drivers and Northern European drivers for the same reason. But outside of that, they're taught over there that it doesn't make any difference. Aggression is the primary thing. If they have to bang into each other on road cars, they'll do it. In the United States, we kind of frown on banging each other on road races. So they're a little more cavalier with rubbing wheels.
I think most people in America don't believe that race car drivers are athletes. There's a hesitation to call them athletes. Is that true, Ed, in your experience?
I think it was years ago. People didn't feel race car drivers were athletes. But if you look at what it takes to be a race car driver now, probably harder than any other sport. In every sport, whether it be baseball or football or whatever, You have several minutes of intense activity followed by, oh, let's get in a huddle and talk it over, or let's go over to the dugout and change what we're doing. A race car driver, when that green flag drops, he is giving full physical exertion constantly. And all of a sudden the yellow flag comes out, you pull into the pits. You haven't stopped being athletic or exerting energy. You have to figure out how to get into the pits, how to stop right. And you're only there for 10, 15 seconds and you're gone again and full energy.
Because most people feel like, well, I drive a car and it's just going faster and they're sitting. Is chess a sport?
It's a mental sport. And I will bet you that there are people who play chess that their heart rate goes as high as some guy running a 50-yard touchdown.
Or the brain waves.
Or the brain waves.
Or whatever.
It takes a lot of strength to drive a race car. Upper body strength, arms, legs, shoulders, every part of your body is driving that car, using the brakes, turning the wheel. You're using your whole body.
What was your first car?
Gosh, it was a 1958 Chevy, red with a white convertible top.
Who taught you how to drive?
You know, nobody actually did. I don't recall anybody sitting down and saying, here's how you drive a car. As a kid, I watched people drive. And then, like with a fellow across the street, he would say, here, move this car up and down. Can you move this over to the other side of the shop? Or my aunt would say, can you back this out of the driveway? Now, be careful. And I would get watched, you know, I mean, she would stand there and watch. But nobody actually, taught me how to drive.
What do you think of how the Mustangs look like, the 60 Mustangs, and the Camaros are the throwback Camaros now? And my dream car is a 1969 Dodge Charger, which is the General Lee, as you know. And they have the Dodge Challengers now, which come in Hemi Orange. Do you like that sort of modern retro look?
I do like the throwbacks. The older I have become, the more nostalgic I have become. I've fallen back in love with old westerns and old detective shows and stuff like that. And when I look at the cars over the last 20 or 30 years, cars lost their personalities. And with these new Camaros and the Mustangs, I'm a little partial to the General Motors side, and the Chrysler products. It makes me feel good when I look down the street, even if I don't want one, to say, oh gosh, that looks nice.
Yeah.
You know, my wife wants a 1969 Camaro, but she saw a new retro Camaro and she said, gosh, they're nice looking and it reminds me of the 69.
That's right.
And I think that helps the market. It helps GM and Ford and those guys sell cars. But it takes my generation, you know, the baby boom generation, and it makes us feel like, gosh, we're still viable. We're in the marketplace. People want to sell us cars. It makes people of your generation say, gosh, that reminds me of my dad's car. I want one.
Right, the one I saw on TV. How do I do a burnout or a donut in a car?
Do you really want to?
No, because I don't want to pay for the tires and be like slamming
but if
into
you really
a
want
curb.
to,
But
depends on the kind of car you're driving. If you're in a manual transmission car, you know, stick it down in first gear while you're stopped, pop the clutch, and slam the gas down as hard as you can. You're probably going to chirp the wheels pretty good.
yeah.
And if you're in an automatic, you can do the same thing, but not put it in neutral and slam it in the gear like I see people do. Push on the brake as hard as you can. Put the gas on the floor as hard as you can. Let off the gas.
With
and
do both feet.
both feet.
Both feet.
And your tires will actually start spinning. There's a lot of, you can overcome the brake force. If you're holding the brake down and got your foot on the floor, I mean flat on the floor, in all likelihood, the rear brakes are not going to be enough to hold the tire from spinning, and you'll start spinning it and then release the brake, and you're burning rubber.
Can you smoke them that way? You smoke them?
Oh, sure.
Does emergency brake slide? Is that a real thing?
You see it done in you know, some of the, what I don't call, I don't want to say anything bad about any type of racing, but a lot of the showy things you see on TV where people are trying to do J-turns and stuff, they'll use the brakes.
Yeah.
And you can actually use that in a tactical manner to evade roadblocks. You can come up and pull the brake and lock.
That swings the rear end?
Well, you have to turn the steering wheel at the same time. You can do that, but you won't ever see it on a racetrack.
When's the last time you were in a wreck on the street?
Wreck on the street. Had to be in sometime in the 60s, late 60s.
What's next for you?
Well, as you know, I'm still dealing with cancer. My next thing to do is make sure that I continue to overcome this I've had some setbacks, but I have goals set to keep moving ahead, and my health is good right now.
You look good. You sound good.
And I'm working on sponsorship for the upcoming race season for the prototype sports cars, and I've already made some arrangements with one of the manufacturers on the chassis I'll use, and I will be using Chevrolet engines if we get this thing together. We're chasing sponsorships. We have a couple potential sponsors that we're dealing with right now. But I was also approached. Let's face it, I'm a veteran driver. Been around 55 years, getting ready to start a 56th year in racing. But I have been approached, possibly putting together a program for the Indy 500 for this year. It's the 100th anniversary for the Indy 500. So everybody who's got an IndyCar license is out chasing a car, trying to get the sponsorship. So everybody wants to be involved in the 100th running. And I didn't have it on my radar. I was more interested in getting back in a prototype sports car. But since this was mentioned to me, and I was told that the monies might be available and the support might be there, we've started putting together a program. I've approached a couple of the teams that I have worked with and done testing for in the past. If we can work out the financing, we may try and do the Indy 500. But I haven't given up on sports cars. There's still work there to be done. I'll never give up.
Why are there two D's in Ed?
Okay.
I waited to the end to ask.
Well, when we were talking about how I got started in living with my grandmother and everything, my dad died when I was real young, and he was Ed, and I was Ed, and I didn't want to ever forget him. Even though I was 6, just a couple weeks before I turned 7. I don't know, something told me, don't ever forget this man. He was your father. So I added a D for my dad. That was it.
I like that. Ed, I really, really appreciate the time with this interview. I wish you the best of luck in health and on the track.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate being here.
All right, thanks. This is Andrew Paul Cronin, and you've been listening to the Q&A with A.P.C. To hear archived episodes, go to soundcloud.com/QAAPC or subscribe to the show on iTunes. For exclusive content, including upcoming shows, behind-the-scenes pictures, and more, follow the show on Instagram at instagram.com/QAAPC. The executive producer of the Q&A with A.P.C. is Ben Riley.